Thank you for joining us today for the launch of the exhibition catalog for A Seat at the Table, Chinese Immigration and British Columbia. We are gathered here today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. 多謝大家今日參加我哋一席之地 BC 省與華人的遷徙嘅展覽目錄發佈會。我哋今日呢個聚會係喺 Coast Salish 嘅 Musqueam、Squamish 同埋 Tsleil-Waututh 原住民嘅傳統祖傳以及從未被割讓嘅土地上面進行。大家好 ，Hello, my name is Denise Fong. I am a UBC PhD candidate and co-curator of the exhibition. I will be one of the MCs today along with Winnie. 我係方正儀 ，BC 大學嘅博士候選人。亦都係一席之地展覽嘅共同策展人。今日我同 Winnie 會係呢一個節目嘅共同主持人。
I'm the Visitor Services and Community Engagement Coordinator at the Chinese Canadian Museum of British Columbia. We're really glad to see all of you today online at this virtual celebration event. 大家好，我係關詠欣，BC 省華裔博物館嘅訪客及社區關係統籌。我哋好開心今日可以喺呢個線上直播見到大家。I will now introduce Mauro Becerra, CEO of the Museum of Vancouver, to share his welcoming remarks. 首先我要介紹今日第一位嘉賓，溫哥華博物館嘅行政總裁 Mauro Becerra 上嚟致歡迎詞。Welcome, Mauro.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you, Winnie. My name's Mauro Becerra, the CEO of the Museum of Vancouver, and we're super excited to be participating in the launch of this catalog, A Seat at the Table, Immigration and Chinese Immigration and British Columbia. The initiative began with the Museum of Vancouver and UBC almost 5 years ago, preceded my tenure here at the organization. It's been an extremely collaborative effort that has grown to include a multitude of partners from the community from across the province. The project, A Seat at the Table, evolved to align with the provincial legacy and promise and apology to the Chinese community, a goal to create a new museum. And in fact, one of the great outcomes of this initiative has been the creation of BC's newest museum, the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of British Columbia. The project has, in essence, set the table for future collaborations and partnerships for the organization as we strive to include knowledge holders in the telling of the stories that make this province such a rich and great place to be and live. If you want to learn more, our exhibition will run for another 10 months here. There's an exhibition in Vancouver's Chinatown at the Hon Sen. That's the CCM inaugural exhibition. And of course, this wonderful catalog that you can pick up and learn more about the initiative. To close, I do want to take a moment. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my staff, the MOV team that worked incredibly hard over the past 2 years to build 2 exhibitions, one here, one remote, and produce this catalog, all during the course of a pandemic. The project wouldn't have happened without their dedication, their resilience, and their commitment. And I thought I'd take a moment to thank them. Thank you, Davey, and thank you all for your work and effort on this initiative. Over to you.
Thank you. We have a very packed schedule today. To begin, UBC President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Santa Ono, will present his welcoming remarks. We will then hear from our exhibition co-curator, Dr. Henry Yu, and Research and Design Advisor, Catherine Clement, who will share about the exhibition development process. 我哋今日嘅節目相當緊湊。首先，我哋會播出 BC 大學校長 Santa Ono 嘅歡迎詞。我哋仲邀請到一席之地嘅共同策展人余傳毅博士，同埋我哋嘅研究及設計顧問 Catherine Clement 嚟分享一下展覽嘅策劃嘅過程。Following that, we will invite exhibition co-curator Dr. Viviane Gosselin to share highlights from the exhibition catalog. And we will end with the launch of our exhibition catalog's companion website. 跟住落嚟，我哋會邀請共同策展人 Viviane Gosselin 博士去分享一下展覽目錄裏邊嘅內容，然後我哋會介紹一下呢個展覽目錄嘅相關嘅專業。
We've also invited 3 special guests to our launch event today. Dr. Grace Wong Sneddon of Victoria, BC, New York-based lawyer, Ms. Carol F. Lee, and Vancouver-based artist, Stella Zheng, who will each share about their important contributions to the exhibition. 我哋今日仲邀請到3位特別嘉賓到我哋今日嘅線上發佈會，包括來自維多利亞嘅陳美貞博士，來自紐約嘅律師 Carol F. Lee， 同埋溫哥華本地藝術家鄭曉薇，佢哋都會各自分享佢哋喺展覽中所展出嘅部分。We will also have a period at the end of today's program to respond to questions. So if you'd like to ask any questions of our speakers throughout the event, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. 節目最後亦都會有問答環節，所以如果你對任何一位嘉賓有咩問題想問嘅話，可以將問題發喺 Zoom 聊天室裡面嘅 Q&A 問答留言板。All right, we'll now move on to our next segment of the evening, a video produced by the Museum of Vancouver, A Seat at the Table, A Year in Review, followed by welcoming remarks by UBC President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Santa Ono. 好，咁我哋正式開始啦。今日下一個環節咧，我哋會播放由溫哥華博物館製作嘅短片一席之地嘅1年回顧，然後再播出 BC 大學校長 Dr. Santa Ono 嘅歡迎詞。Take it away, Davey.
Hi everyone, welcome virtually here to the Museum of Vancouver.
Bonjour à tous, bienvenue au musée de Vancouver. Aujourd'hui, nous allons découvrir ensemble l'exposition A Seat at the Table.
Thank you and welcome everybody.
We're thrilled to have you here virtually.
So this exhibition uses the voices of Chinese Canadians to kind of reveal kind of the hardships, the stories, but also their strength, their resilience.
This is piece is called My Mother's Table, and a tablecloth made from a number of letters sent to her from her father.
In this display, we see a Chinese language typewriter. So if you focus in to see the engraved Chinese characters.
That kind of reflection of the Chinese immigration experience, you know, through time, not just deep historical, but also contemporary.
It's really exciting to be able to represent Chinese Canadians and acknowledge some of the work that these activists, artists, and historians and community members have contributed to how we understand Chinese Canadian history today.
Thank you again, and stay safe.
Stay safe, stay well. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye to everybody in Hong Kong. Thanks for tuning in.
Good night, everyone.
A seat at the table presents a timely opportunity to reflect on issues related to belonging, racism, agency, resilience, and reparation. It's a reminder that we have a shared responsibility in the fight against racism. This project would not have been possible without the generous contributions of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Province of British Columbia, the City of Vancouver, the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of BC, and the Museum of Vancouver. We're also grateful for the support of community elders and contributors who have led or walked alongside us throughout the process. I would also like to acknowledge the work of Dr. Henry Yu, Denise Fong, and their student research team at the Initiative for Student Teaching and Research in Chinese Canadian Studies. I express my sincere appreciation to all of the local knowledge holders who've generously shared their time, their stories, and personal belongings to make this project come to life.
I will now introduce Dr. Henry Yu, and he's the Associate Professor and Co-Curator of the exhibition, Concept and Analysis.
Thanks, Winnie, for the introduction. Thanks, Winnie, for the introduction. I'm Henry Yu. I teach history at UBC, and I'm really honored to be one of the co-curators, along with Denise Fong and Viviane Gosselin of MOV. A massive undertaking of 2 exhibits and exhibitions. They take a lot of people, and there's so many people that contributed to this. The staff at MOV, so many students at UBC, all the community partners who contributed their stories, their objects. Catherine Clement, who you'll hear from next, helped gather a lot of contacts from people who had stories to tell, stories to share, and perhaps never had a chance to share them. And that's what museums mean. They're a way in which society reflects itself within the stories that are shared in a space like a seat at the table. The name itself, A Seat at the Table, came from a community advisory that the curators worked with, getting advice. What should be the subject? What are the themes that should be in these exhibits? And A Seat at the Table, to me, captures multiple meanings. A Seat at the Table captures the struggles that Chinese Canadians had to endure to overcome being disenfranchised, not being able to vote, not being able to work in certain jobs, not being able to live in certain parts of Canada. Having come here and having, along with others, suffered from white supremacy, from the founding of a nation and a province that didn't have a seat at the table because it was built as a white man's province, an actual political slogan in British Columbia. So a seat at the table means the struggles and the resilience of a set of people who had to fight literally for a seat at the table, to just be there. We had Chinese Canadians who fought in the First World War, Second World War, who couldn't even vote, and yet would give their lives just to have a seat at the table. A Seat at the Table also celebrates our long history of having restaurants, cafes, every small town having a Chinese Canadian cafe, of the joy of sitting around the table, as this beautiful art piece behind me shows, of sitting at dim sum, sitting at a family table, sitting with friends, community members. So A Seat at the Table is both a celebration and a reckoning and an acknowledgement of a difficult history, and a difficult history and a set of struggles that have made our society better. And so I want to thank all those students who helped interview community members, all those community members who shared their stories, students at UBC, at the Center for Digital Media, at many educational institutions who created beautiful virtual reality and video clips, all these kinds of things that have made this an exciting exhibition. And I wanted to thank in particular the support of the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of British Columbia for helping bring this to life and helping us perhaps not just earn a seat at the table, but create the possibility of changing that table itself so that we can have a more fair, inclusive, and just society. And so I welcome all of you to come to one of the two exhibitions if you haven't yet already. If you come to pick up a catalog so that you'll have something you can read about and bring that exhibition home to you. It's a labor of love of many people, labor of love of a community that has long suffered and yet in its struggle to earn a seat at the table has really made Canada a better place. Thank you.
Thank you for the great introduction, Henry. 多謝你咁精彩嘅介紹啊 Henry. Next, we will introduce Catherine Clement, who imagined the Sea of Faces installation at the entrance of the Chinatown site of A Seat at the Table and contributed many of the Chinatown stories, artifacts, and photos on display at our location here. We will ask her to comment on how she finds these items, such as the artifacts from Chinatown gambling den. 跟住落嚟，我哋邀請到 Catherine Clement。佢係門口，我哋華裔博物館門口呢個雨海群上人像裝置作品嘅設計師，亦都為呢個展點貢獻咗好多故事同埋照片。佢將會分享佢喺點樣揾到好多好似我旁邊呢個舊式嘅老虎機呢啲咁樣嘅故事嘅。歡迎 Catherine，welcome Catherine。
Thanks so much, Winnie. One of the great things about these exhibitions is that the bulk of the material is crowdsourced from the community. What you're seeing are things that are coming from private family collections, and this might be one of the only times you're ever going to see some of these objects. And a lot of them, every object starts with a story, of course. And one of the lucky things that I get to do is talk to people about their stories. And frequently, I go in to ask a person about one specific story, and I come away with 5 new stories. And that's the case here with one of the set of objects that I want to highlight for us. I had heard about this Chinese boxer who was a championship boxer back in the 20s and 30s. It was very, very rare. And he was a bit of a novelty. It was rare for Chinese to be boxers, championship boxers back then. So I went to his son, Gary, to learn a little bit more about Zhou Eng's boxing career. And through that, I learned that not only was Zhou a championship boxer, he was also a produce store manager. He became an owner of winning horse races, racing horses, and he operated a gambling den. And at this point in time in Chinatown history, it was gambling dens were illegal for the longest time. And they were very secretive. They were often wedged right in between like a storefront on the front and a store or restaurant on the back. And they were in between. They were secretive, they were dark, they were smoky, but they were a place for entertainment, for many of the bachelors to go and see if they could try their luck to win a bit more money than what they were making. And what was interesting is that because they're so secretive, there's almost no photos from them and very, very little artifacts. And yet Gary had kept some of the artifacts from his father's gambling den, which were these Paigao tiles that you see there in the foreground. And if we look up a little bit, we'll see later on, Zhou Eng introduced these tiny slot machines. That blue object up there is a tiny slot machine. And on top, there's sort of the 3, different figures that you have to match up. These were for a dime, basically. And later on, Zhou began to sell these little lighters that you can see there. These are very rare little tiny micro lighters. And unfortunately, you can't really see what's on them, but it's very typical of the time. They're sort of, girls in bathing suits and whatever. So these were really special objects would normally never get to see. And we're very grateful for Gary for showing them to us. And he told me some stories he remembers as a young kid with his father, that they would get these bags of money from the gambling den, and they would pack into the car and they'd go off and they'd go to visit the police chief's house. And you just can imagine what happened there. And again, these are stories and artifacts that would be lost to time, and we're so grateful when families keep them and when they share these stories with us. And just to go back though, so there's so many objects in these exhibitions that, as I said, are coming from family collections. This is truly a community exhibition. And because these things are so precious, often the last of their kind, I highly recommend people who haven't seen the show to go and to see these objects, because they will go back into hiding again, and it may be a while before you ever get a chance to see them. But this is an example of how one story leads to another story, leads to a treasure trove of artifacts that haven't been seen before. And we're so grateful that in this exhibition at the Seat at the Table, we finally have a chance to show some of these remarkable pieces of history from our community. Back over to you, Winnie. Thank you.
Who designed a series of beautiful walk illustrations that have become very popular amongst our visitors here at the Chinese Canadian Museum. 我哋有請下一位嘉賓鄭曉薇。鄭曉薇係一名溫哥華插畫師同埋藝術家。佢嘅作品包括我哋展覽入邊嘅油彩鋼鐵炒鑊系列。有請 Stella。Okay. Audio's good now? All right. So thank you for your amusing contributions to the exhibition, Catherine. Catherine, 多謝你對於展覽所作出嘅重要貢獻。The next speaker we have with us today is Stella Zheng. Stella is a Vancouver-based illustrator and artist who designed a series of beautiful walk illustrations that have become very popular amongst our visitors here at the Chinese Canadian Museum. So 我哋有請下一位嘉賓鄭曉薇女士。鄭曉薇係一名溫哥華嘅插畫師同埋藝術家。佢嘅作品包括我哋展覽入邊嘅油彩鋼鐵炒鑊系列。有請 Stella。Welcome, Stella.
Thank you, Winnie, for that introduction. Like Winnie said, my name is Stella, and I'm one of the artists who worked on the walk paintings you see at both exhibition locations. Unfortunately, Elisa, my colleague who helped design these paintings, couldn't make it tonight, so I will be speaking on behalf of both of us. Elisa and I had originally come up with these ideas you see at the Hansing location while we were eating dim sum together last year. Family dim sum on a Sunday is the painting that most people see when they first enter the exhibit. So we wanted to make something that encapsulated the intersections between culture and food, which is a prominent theme throughout this exhibit. For this piece, we decided to create an image of a multi-generational family eating dim sum together. There are multiple people sitting at a table, shoulder to shoulder, eating copious amounts of starchy, salty, and mouth-watering food. Our goal was to recreate the loud, almost chaotic energy that you often see at Chinese restaurants. Whenever I go out for dim sum, it often feels like there are 10 different conversations happening at the same time. There's always a mom who's busy trying to get her kids to eat. There are always several pieces of hot gossip being passed around the table. And then there are the grandparents who are too busy to pay attention to anything other than the food they plan on eating. Elisa and I wanted these 3 walks to be understood as a series. A truly great life will bring mooncakes in abundance is a continuation of the food and cultural relationship that we wanted to highlight. Mooncakes that are eaten during the Mid-Autumn Festival seemed like a fitting piece of our culture to showcase in this painting. The traditional Chinese lattice designs that are used here to signify the intricate patterns pressed onto mooncakes. A truly great noodle will bring you happiness calls back to Elisa's life growing up in Toronto. She would eat gongzaimin for almost every meal in university and wanted to commemorate that time in her life. Traditional Chinese lattice designs have also been used here, not only as a decorative motif, but to represent the noodles itself. Choya Ping'on and Thank You Come Again are the last paintings you see at the exhibit at MOV. Viviane and I decided to use these paintings as an opportunity to send off the viewers as they leave the exhibit. Choya Ping'on is a Chinese idiom meaning peace when you come and go, which is often used as a greeting. This painting also utilizes the lattice designs that are present in the previous exhibit as well. And last but not least, Thank You Come Again is inspired by signs that are commonly seen in American diners from the 50s. Speaking for myself, I was terrified of starting these paintings. I've never painted on anything like this before, so I had no idea what it was going to look like at the end. I was afraid that the complicated composition from a bird's eye view wasn't going to be legible for the viewers. I was afraid that the paint was going to start peeling off while I was applying it because I'd never painted on metal before. And I was also afraid that the image was going to look skewed because I had never painted a flat image on something that was concave. We also started working on these paintings at a really weird point in my life. I had just finished my degree at Emily Carr a few months prior. My last semester there was cut short because of the pandemic, and we had to skip the graduation ceremony and the grad show because there was no way for us to gather safely at that point. I'd been experiencing a bit of burnout because I'd been working so intensely to finish my degree. So when everything came to a stop, I felt kind of lost. I didn't know what my future was going to look like, personally or professionally. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to have people like Viviane, who has been nothing but supportive and helpful the entire time we were working together. And I also had Elisa, who had advocated for me and given me the opportunity to work on this with her. Thankfully, Elisa and I have been able to work together on a couple other projects together, like Solidarity Forever tote bags and the Mao calendar for 2021. And we are currently working on a mural that's also going to be located in Vancouver's Chinatown called the Suzhou Alley Women's Mural with several other local artists. You can follow us at Suzhou Alley Mural on Instagram, and you can visit our website at suzhoualleymural.ca for more information and updates. Thank you everyone for all of the positive feedback on the paintings. Thank you everyone at MOV and CCM for including me in this exhibition. I feel so incredibly honored to be a part of this, and I really hope you all enjoy the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for sharing your artistic vision with us, Stella. 多謝你今日同我哋分享你嘅創作靈感啊 Stella. Now I'm going to pass the time over to Denise, who is at the Museum of Vancouver. 我而家將時間交翻俾喺溫哥華博物館嘅 Denise.
Thank you, Winnie. We are excited to get to the highlight of today's launch event, the launch of the A Seat at the Table exhibition catalog. 唔該晒 Winnie。我哋而家嚟到今日嘅重點主角，就係介紹我哋一席之地嘅展覽目錄。我哋有請 Viviane Gosselin 博士同我哋介紹一下目錄嘅內容。佢係溫哥華博物館嘅館藏及展覽總監，以及當代文化策展人，亦都係一席之地嘅共同策展人。I will now invite Dr. Viviane Gosselin, Museum of Vancouver's Director of Collections and Exhibitions, Curator of Contemporary Culture, and co-curator of A Seat at the Table, to introduce us to the catalog. Welcome, Viviane.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. A Seat at the Table is an important project, so this makes this catalog an important publication. It is a wonderful record of the themes and stories and images that you'll have seen or you will see when visiting the exhibitions. When we first started to work on the catalog, I remember thinking, well, you know, that will be easy. The exhibitions are done. All the material is ready to go. We just have to put everything on paper now. And well, it wasn't that simple. Of course, every time you change medium, there's a need to adapt the content. How do we talk about the exhibit design, for example? How do we convey the collaborative, multimedia, multilingual aspect of the project? And so it was important for us to emphasize the oneness of the project. So we created a single narrative flow in the book rather than drawing strong divisions between the two exhibitions. For the same reason, we combine in the catalog the artworks and artifacts from the two exhibitions. QR codes are integrated throughout the catalog, so to provide additional platforms. So in other words, you can access complementary content digitally as you read. To reflect the project's commitment to inclusion through multilingual access, the catalog is available in 2 sets of written languages. So we have a catalog that's English and traditional Chinese, and a catalog that's English and simplified Chinese. So when purchasing the book, you want to make sure to identify the set of language you want. We have included all the stories and over 150 images found in the exhibitions. We even added 3 curatorial essays from Henry Yu, Denise Fong, and myself. So that is the bonus content, sort of behind the scene reflective pieces about the project. And really what makes any book enjoyable and unique is that you hold in your hands an entire world, like a microcosm. And in the case of this book, it is the culmination of 3 years of epic conversations that, with multiple groups of knowledge holders and makers to come up with the best way to talk about the diversity of Chinese immigrant experience in BC. It is a beautifully contained world, thanks to the work of designer Yan Rongxiao. Her sensibility and her deep understanding of the project are enhancing the reader's experience in a big way. On a personal note, working on this project has helped me realize more sharply the harm done to racialized groups and individuals when they are made invisible in public stories of belonging in the media, at school, and in museums. So this project is really about foregrounding historically underrepresented lived experiences and creating new memories, new understandings to build communities that are more inclusive and equitable. So my last note is that the exhibitions, it will eventually come down, but really the book is that tangible legacy of A Seat at the Table. It will live in schools. We're already sending it to public libraries and the archives all over BC and beyond. It can live in your home too. And the additions to the book to our libraries collectively will help reach this big goal of A Seat at the Table, which is to rethink the Chinese diaspora of BC as a way of rethinking British Columbia. Thank you, and back over to you, Denise.
Thank you for walking us through the catalog, Viviane. And then next we have our one of our guest speakers, Dr. Grace Wong Sneddon. Viviane, 多謝你介紹呢個展覽目錄嘅裏邊一啲嘅主要嘅內容。我哋下一位嘉賓係陳美貞博士。She is an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Victoria's Department of Art History and Visual Studies. Featured in the A Seat at the Table MOV exhibition is a cake decorating kit from her father, Chinyi Yang. Chinyi Yang's story is featured as well in the oral history video series of A Seat at the Table. 佢係維多利亞大學美術史及視覺藝術系嘅兼職助理教授。喺溫哥華博物館一席之地展點就展出咗一套佢爸爸陳良慧嘅蛋糕裝飾用具。陳良慧嘅故事亦都收錄咗喺一席之地口述歷史短片嘅系列裏邊。我哋而家邀請陳博士去分享一下佢嘅家庭故事同埋佢同溫哥華博物館嘅合作。We will now invite Dr. Wong Sneddon to share her family story and collaboration with the MOV. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you, Denise. And thank you as well to Viviane and to the MOV team. Your passion, your interests, your insights, and your intuitive questions really tease out some of my forgotten memories. Your precise attention to detail was unwavering to ensure that nothing was missed. Viviane, I really appreciate how you kept in touch and kept me updated throughout this process. I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity to share not just the story of my father, Chen Yi-yang, but to pay tribute to the Chinese men like him, many of whom I call Gong Gong, who endured incredible loneliness, separated from family. As I shared with Denise and Viviane, it was important to recognize the resiliency of these early pioneers in their early and daily struggles, and the agency that they willed as they endured against all odds. I also want to acknowledge the stories of the woman, like my mother, who came to a new country to marry someone they barely knew, or maybe have never even met, all in the hope of providing a better life for their children. I love how the exhibits in the MOV are interactive, engaging, and visually moving. They brought back so many memories of events, of gatherings, of meals shared. It provides a forum to share the day-to-day experiences of Chinese Canadian history in a very meaningful way. The past matters. It can ground us in the present, and it can help us to take responsibility for our future as Chinese Canadians. My father, as the second son, was to be a scholar in his family. However, fate stepped in when his big brother returned from Vancouver, BC, back to China with the superstitions of a white forelock. My father was sent at the age of 14 in his place to Canada. As a teenager, still with a key down his back, he was teased muchly in 1908 Vancouver, especially following the Vancouver riots of 1907. You can see my dad looking as a little 14-year-old in his passport. Hoi San village friends, where Hoi San, helped to find him a kitchen job at the Pacific Cable Board Station, which served as the eastern terminus of the Trans-Pacific Telegraph Cable. He worked there from 1908 to 1959. But as a Chinese person, he did not leave with a pension. He was so angry and so hurt over that injustice. I would like to take a moment to pay my respects to the Wahhayu First Nations, on whose traditional lands, known to some as Banfield, BC, who befriended a lonely young boy and taught him to fish in their waters. Of the 51 years he spent in Banfield, 39 were spent alone without family. I can't even fathom how lonely he must have felt. Yet he persevered. With his early scholarly training, he knew how to study, and he taught himself to read and write English. With a full-time job, Dad was able to save money to return back to China, first to marry and conceive a daughter, my sister, and a decade later, my brother was born. All of this occurred under the Canada Immigration Act, which prevented only the Chinese from family unification. Dad was unable to bring his family to join him. During these many years, my sister got married, started her own family. His wife died, and he married my mother to look after his young son. Remember, this was pre-eHarmony, so it was just by photo. An avid reader, Dad was prepared when the Canada Immigration Act ended. He responded quickly and brought my mother and brother to Canada, and they settled in Banfield. It was the first time they've seen snow. My brother says that Banfield was really quiet. He remembers the fishing trip with Dad. Dad was really worried, though, when I was conceived. My mom was already older, and he wanted her to be safe. So he sent her and my brother to Victoria. So in the photo here, you can see my brother, my dad, and I, and me as a little child in our first home. That was a picture of my brother and my mother just before they came over to Canada. And that chop on the right-hand corner is my father's original chop. In Victoria, my brother is playing tennis with a pal. Chinese were not allowed to play tennis in the public courts. So the Chinese actually put money together and purchased that tennis court on Harold Street, and that's where they're playing tennis. Let me tell you a little bit about his baking. Even when he was in Canada with his family, he was still alone in Banfield because he went back there to work for another 6 years. While he was there, he visited a town close by, Port Alberni. He was kind, he was generous, always ready to lend a hand. He made many friends. His baking skills also helped. Cookies, cakes, baked breads, and pastry. Dad's recipe for fruitcake was legendary. It was a much sought out gift. In this photograph, you can see his handwritten recipe. If you write really fast, you can probably get this recipe and make it yourself. We still use this recipe for our own Christmas cake today. I don't know where Dad got this recipe from, but I'd like to share this story with you and maybe you can shed some light. Dad baked many fruitcakes to give to family, friends, and neighbors at Christmas. We still keep up that tradition today in our family. Every year, I give fruitcake to colleagues and other departments at work. I was surprised one day when someone I didn't recognize showed up at my office door. He was retiring that year and wanted to come by and tell me how much he appreciated the fruitcake I gave to his department over the years. He says that the fruitcake reminded him of his mother and home. And of course, when I asked him where home was, it was Port Alberni. This fruitcake to me is a delicious byproduct of the many diverse families and many communities. From this fruitcake recipe, Dad modified the amount of fruit, nuts, and brandy, varying the fruitcake either light or dark to develop his wedding cake recipe. You can see earlier his cake decorating cake with all the different decorating tips in a handsome wooden box. He also had little cutout hearts and wedding bells. He made many wedding cakes over many decades. Our dining room table was dedicated to Dad's cake projects. He made many over the years and they just got fancier and fancier. And it accumulated in his last wedding cake that he made for me when he was 81. As I share some of my family photos with you, I'm happy to say that my dad, unlike many of his countrymen, was fortunate to see and be with his children and his grandchildren in his later years. He even babysat my first two children. My mom, too, was surrounded by her family, including helping to bring her brother and sister and their families to Canada. My parents modeled and provided agency to us, for my brother and I. They gave us the grounding and the confidence to be proud of who we are, of our Chineseness and appreciation of their sacrifices. But more than that, the daily discussions about what matters, what we value, time devoted to family, of meals shared and time with children. A generation later, my dad in his 80s walked my sons to school and took the bus with him to Chinese school. I will always remember my dad playing swords made of paper rolls with my boys and my mom piggyback my girls. Of course, their legs were reaching the ground since they were so big and she was so little. I know that my parents' legacy lives on through them. So I thank you, Museum of Vancouver, your creative and committed staff, your vision of the exhibit, and your beautifully illustrated catalog. And I thank you for this opportunity to share my family story with you all. Over to you, Davey. There's my mom with my kids.
Thank you for sharing your family story and contributions to the exhibition, Grace. Grace, 多謝你分享你嘅家庭故事同埋喺呢一個展覽裏邊所參與嘅一啲點滴。Last but not least, I would like to introduce our guest, Ms. Carol F. Lee. Ms. Lee is a lawyer based in New York who has a deep passion for family history research. She has conducted extensive archival and oral history research on her maternal family's global migration journey. The Kwan family story is also featured in the oral history video series of A Seat at the Table. 到咗我哋嘅壓軸嘉賓 Carol F. Lee 律師，李律師喺紐約居住，佢對於家庭歷史研究非常之充滿熱情。 佢通過研究檔案文件同埋採訪佢嘅家人，發掘咗好多關於佢外公關氏嘅家庭嘅歷史。關氏家族嘅歷史亦都收錄喺一席之地嘅口述歷史短片系列當中。Welcome, Carol.
I've been pursuing and assembling my family history for decades now. It gives me great joy to make discoveries and to share them. Tonight, I'd like to tell a couple of vignettes about people and places that I talked about in my videos for A Seat at the Table. Together, these stories show that family history discoveries create connections across time and place with the help of collaboration, persistence, and good luck. Let me start with my great-grandfather, Kwan Sen Kwok, Mom's grandfather. He figures in one of the videos. I knew that he was born in Dailong village in Hoi Ping. He emigrated to Canada, where he became a fish peddler from a pushcart. And later he became a partner in a store on East Pender Street that sold groceries and herbal medicines. He saved money to make trips back to China and fathered several children who were born several years apart. He brought my grandfather to Canada at age 12 in 1903. Toward the end of his life, he went back to the village where he died in 1915. I even knew what my great-grandfather looked like from photos in family albums and from an oil portrait that was painted in Vancouver and belonged to my grandfather for more than 50 years. It now hangs on my wall. What I didn't know and wanted to find out was when my great-grandfather first came to Canada and when he returned to China for the last time. There, I hit what genealogists call a brick wall. The Chinese head tax register was posted on the Library and Archives Canada website, and it was searchable by name thanks to the indexing work of Henry and his team at UBC. But there was no Kwan Sen Kwok. I tried every variant spelling of the 3 characters of his name that I could think of. And every couple of years, I would go back and hope that maybe if I searched again, I might find his name, but there was still no Kwan Sen Kwok. Later, I was given a searchable spreadsheet that I was prepared at UBC, and I found everybody who came from that village to Canada during the relevant time period. And there was still no Kwan Sen Kwok. Finally, I came across a different name for my great-grandfather in the BC death certificate of his younger son, my great-uncle. The name was Kwan Loi Hing, which bears no resemblance to Kwan Sen Kwok. When I searched for Kwan Loi Hing in the Library and Archives Canada website, I found his 1913 departure certificate with his photo, his Asian place of birth, and the name of his store. Everything matched except the name. It was without doubt my great-grandfather. Best of all, the certificate included information not only about his departure from Vancouver, December 1913 on the Empress of Russia, but also his first arrival in Canada, April 1898 on the Empress of Japan. I still don't know why he used 2 different names, but I found the answers to my questions. The collaboration here was the work of Henry and his team on the head tax register, and the persistence was mine, and it was finally rewarded with good luck. My next story also involves collaboration. In one of the videos, I talk about the boarding school in Canton, now called Guangzhou, where Mom and her 2 younger brothers went to school from early 1936 until the fall of 1937. My grandfather had decided to enroll the children in school in China so they would learn Chinese language and culture, since they hadn't paid much attention to lessons from a Chinese tutor in Vancouver. Mom had told me stories about the school, including the students' daily recitations of Sun Yat-sen's The 3 Principles of the People's Livelihood, and the need to get the bed sheets perfectly flat and tucked in to avoid demerits. Mom told me that the school was in Saichun, or West Village, within walking distance of Shaymin Island. She had several snapshots she took of the school buildings on a little camera that she had bought in Hong Kong. Uncle Dick also had detailed recollections of the school and the teachers. While Mom and I were in Hong Kong in 1989, we went to a tailor who by coincidence came from Canton. He told Mom that the school was still there. So when Mom and I made a short trip to Canton, we stayed at on Shameen Island, and we went for a walk to try to find the school. She knew that it was along the main boulevard, and so we walked for more than half an hour along the main boulevard looking for the school, but we just couldn't find it. After our trip, I did research on the school, which is called Hip Wo, or Union Middle School. Church archives in Canada and New Zealand had some photos of buildings there. The New Zealand archive sent me a copy of the principal's report about the school's evacuation from Canton in 1937, after Japanese bombing began. However, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find where the school was located. Just last year, I came across a 1935 map of Canton with place names in Chinese. Unfortunately, I can't read or speak Chinese. It occurred to me that Denise, who was overseeing the videos for the exhibit, is fluent in Chinese. So I emailed Denise a scan of the map of Canton and asked her if she would please translate the place names in the vicinity where I thought the school was located. I was overjoyed when Denise did more than that. She found the school. She did a search on Baidu, the Chinese search engine, and found the website of Hip Wo's present-day successor school. It's called the Guangzhou Concord Middle School. The website traced the school's history back to 1911, when Mom's school was founded, and I recognized the historic buildings described on the website. The school's location is farther from Shameen Island than Mom had remembered after more than 50 years. Thanks to persistence and Denise's wonderful help, I now know where Mom and my uncles attended boarding school 85 years ago. I hope these stories demonstrate why I find family history so fascinating. I think of it as a gift that keeps on giving.
Thank you, Carol, for your wonderful sharing about your family history process. And if you would like to watch, feature Carol's story, Grace's story, as well as to listen to other oral histories recorded for the exhibition, you can now do so at the companion website for the exhibition catalog. 多謝 Carol 嘅分享。等我哋明白到你做家庭歷史研究嘅過程。如果你想收睇我哋嘅口述歷史短片系列，你而家可以瀏覽我哋嘅展覽嘅目錄嘅專頁。On this website, you will be able to view oral history videos produced by students from UBC's Initiative for Student Teaching and Research in Chinese Canadian Studies, UBC's Asian Canadian and Asian Migration Studies Program, and the UBC Cantonese Program. 喺呢個網站裏邊，你可以睇到由 BC 大學紀固創史研究組、亞裔加拿大同亞裔移民課程同埋 BC 大學粵語課程嘅學生所製作嘅短片。If you have virtual reality goggles at home, you will also be able to view our immersive virtual reality videos produced by local filmmaker Christina Lee and Farhan Hussein. 如果你屋企有一副虛擬現實嘅眼鏡，你仲可以體驗一下由本地電影人李家明同埋 Farhan Hussein 製作嘅沉浸式 Virtual Reality 360電影。On this website, we also feature a pair of animation videos created by students from the Center for Digital Media. 喺呢個網站上，我哋仲有溫哥華數碼媒體中心嘅學生所製作嘅動畫片。To access the films online, simply scan the embedded QR codes in the catalog. 想收睇呢一系列嘅短片，可以掃一掃目錄裏邊嘅二維碼就可以登入我哋嘅專頁。I'll now pass things over to Jenny and Davey, who have been monitoring your questions all evening to lead our Q&A session. 將時間交俾 Jenny 同 Davey.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, so as Denise mentioned, we now have some time for questions and answers with the panel. So if you do have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function. It should be at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we will respond to your questions. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to submit any questions you may have.
Yeah. Oops. Okay. Okay.
It looks like there is a question in the chat at the moment, and maybe we'll just direct this to anybody who's available to answer. It's from Connie Meisner, who says, my father-in-law paid head tax in 1921, but we cannot locate information on his ancestors and arrival. Where would you direct me?
This is Carol. I mentioned in my talk that there is a head tax register which is indexed by name on the website of the Library and Archives Canada. And you can search it by any segment of the name or a combination of parts of the name, or you can search it by year, you can search it, that's the best way to search on the website is that if you want to search it by place name, you can be in touch with Henry, who can send you the Excel spreadsheet, which is searchable for every field on the head tax register. That doesn't mean you'll necessarily find your grandfather, but if you know the date and you know the name, the combination of names, characters in his name, there's a decent chance that you'll find him. And if, as in my own story, if you were looking, you don't find the name, then you should do some research and find out whether he used some other name and try again.
So thanks, Carol, for, so the head tax database that Carol mentioned, so there's two ways you can actually access it. One is, as she mentioned, to go to the Library Archives Canada. If you go to the part about Chinese Canadian history and Chinese Canadian genealogy, you can search by typing things in. But as all of us know, there's variations on spelling in English for Chinese names. And so if you would like, please feel free to send a direct email to any of us here, and it'll get back to our researchers. And what we'll do is we'll send you a searchable Excel spreadsheet, as Carol mentioned, and then you can actually search the way that you would search an Excel spreadsheet, but also you can look for variations on spellings. And so I'll give you an example. If you're looking and you do find him, it may well be that there's a variations on how the village name is spelled. And so there are certain villages, because they're named something in the various topolecs or regional dialects of Cantonese, the four counties, the Siyep dialect, for instance, and so English transliterators who wrote it down and then went into the register could have heard it in many different ways. And so it could get spelled out in very different ways. So I'll give you a very Baksa, which is like sort of white sand. This one village, it could be B-A-K-S-H-A, it could be B-A-K-S-A, it could be B-A, S-A-H. So one of the things is both a frustration, but a joy of doing the historical detective work that Carol has done for her own family history is you have to be patient, you got to keep digging around, and sometimes it's a matter of just looking through and finding variations, spellings when you don't find it right away. So hopefully you can enjoy that process, because when you finally find it, as Carol has sort of shared in her story, it's so gratifying when you finally do find what you're looking for. And I know there are many people here today. I see, in fact, in the chat, Elwin Xie, Elwin's, I know, has done family history in the Xie is in the local dialects of where his family's from, is Der. And so if you're a Der, or a Jie, there are all kinds of records as well from there. So hopefully that'll be one way for you to start that journey of looking for an ancestor.
Sorry, this is Carol again. Another source, and I won't take too much time, is to point you to the ship's passenger lists. There are passenger lists also on the website of Library of Art and Archives of Canada And if you can go to a library, a public library, they will have Ancestry, and you can actually do name searches for the passenger lists. They go through 1935, from generally about 1905 through 1935.
I also know we have a professional genealogist here who does a lot of this kind of work, Linda Yip. So if Linda wants to drop her contact into the chat function, and we can share Linda's contact, because again, ship's records, birth, death, there's lots of different records that hopefully will help in your search.
Great, thank you all for your answers. There's a few questions about the catalog itself. The first one from Gigi is, will the catalogs be distributed to all libraries in BC or just the Lower Mainland?
I can answer the question. So it will be distributed wherever people want to have it shipped. So if you go through, there's going to be a link, I believe that is it Jenny that will be able to put it, so that people who wish to purchase it and have it mailed out, it can be mailed like close to Christmas. If you want to send a copy to family members, for example, and not directly to your home, that can be done anywhere in the world.
Great, thanks, Viviane. Another catalog question. How many people contributed to the making of this catalog, and what will happen to a seat at the table after it closes?
So great question, thank you. How many people contributed? Well, what I love about this catalog, and Denise pushed hard to have every single names. So it looks like there are 3 entire pages of and translated. So 6 pages of names of the individuals who participated, contributed stories, images, and so there's credits for the exhibitions and credits for the catalog. So you can see that there's a lot of duplications. So there's a lot of people who took part in both. And at the same time, there are names that were added as we had new illustrations or new images or some additional stories that were added. And to the questions about the project, the exhibitions will be up for at least another 10 months. So both at the Hansing and at the Museum of Vancouver. The exhibitions were designed to travel. And so we are in conversations with the CCM to talk about how that will shape up in the next few years.
Wonderful, thanks, Viviane. Another related question. This is phenomenal. How long did this project take from start to the launch? And what would you say is your largest lesson learned specifically in working with communities and being more community-based and collaborative in your curatorial process?
I feel that the question Denise, feel free to add, but I think it's directed to perhaps the Museum of Vancouver. And thank you, it is a phenomenal project because of that collaborative, I was talking about epic conversations. It is, we started, I think after 250 names, we start counting numbers of people who contributed. The core team and the advisory group is about 20 people. And how did the museum learn? Museum of Vancouver is not alone in adopting a participatory approach to knowledge building and making. At the end of the day, what it means is the expertise lies outside of the museum more than inside. And so knowledge holders were opening the doors, we're trying to support and learn. And in the process of learning, it's a lot of unlearning, decolonizing our mind, decentering whiteness in the museum is very important. And so Denise, please add to so part of the experience from you as a grad, a student, a co-curator, and university rep.
Sure. Is everyone able to hear me? Yes, okay. So I've been involved in this project since the very beginning, while I'm still doing my doctorate program at UBC. I think a seat at the table is really an amazing opportunity, and I feel very honored to be a part of this process. Because what I learned from being part of this exhibition is we are really, I think, trying to push a lot of boundaries, really trying to question and bring into dialogue a lot of kind of traditional constructs about what do we mean when we talk about Chinese Canadian history, and how do we make this history relevant for the younger generation, but also different generations of Chinese who are here in Canada today. And so part of what I've learned through this process is that it's, I see it as like a chapter or a bookmark in a book that's ongoing. This work that we have here really is built upon the foundation that was established by many historians, community activists, leaders, educators who have done many years of research, dedicated countless hours of their work to do research in Chinatown, record oral histories, speak to elders, document events by photographs and art. And because of that foundation, this project was made possible. And also by bringing together many of the newer waves of immigrants to Canada, talking about some of their experiences of arriving in Canada, establishing themselves here, starting family businesses and whatnot. It's really meaningful to be able to see many of these common themes and connections being built. And we hope that we can continue on in the future. There will be another wonderful exhibit that will be able to address these important issues, continue to raise public awareness about the importance of understanding the experiences of racialized communities in Canada. And I think as well, this project in particular has been very important in creating opportunities for students, both UBC students and students from Center for Digital Media, to gain experiences working on a museum project, learning about ways that they can bring in their own cultural heritage, their language skills, their creative skills to contribute to the storytelling process. So we're really excited that this project was able to provide this kind of a platform for training a lot of young students who can now be equipped with this knowledge and also some skill sets to do work in community engagement and also be able to tell these stories to their friends and their family.
Great, thanks Viviane and Denise, great answers. So I think we have time for a couple additional questions before our final question. So the next one is from Cynthia. Are the farming communities in Burnaby and Surrey represented at these exhibitions?
Maybe I'll answer that, although Denise should also say a few words, because Denise also worked as a co-curator on Across the Pacific, which was an exhibition that predated our seat at the table at Burnaby Village Museum, which focused a lot on Chinese Canadian history in Burnaby. So a lot of those farms, farm families and their stories in Burnaby and the Big Bend in Burnaby are there. We did have some of that material as well here. I think one of the exciting things, and this echoes something that Viviane said in her answer to the previous question about, we needed to capture Chinese Canadian history in all of BC. And that was the mandate for a seat at the table. We tried to focus on stories in every part of British Columbia, small towns, everywhere from Nanaimo up to the north, to the interior. And so, you know, we're very proud in some sense that broader, very diverse history, because the story of what it was like to be in Armstrong, you know, Hao Lee's family story, growing up there and growing vegetables, being a farmer there is very different than, say, a Chinese farmer down in the lower Fraser in the Delta, in the Richmond, Burnaby region. So there's lots of different variations, and it's not a complete story. We weren't able to capture it. In fact, I think a seat at the table for me and for Denise, who worked for over 10 years on digital projects, even before this one, is about creating a process by which people can share their stories. It doesn't just show up in the museum, although the museum space is one that, you know, as many of you have expressed today, is this important space for learning, for sharing, and also of power. For a long time, museums were colonial spaces where colonizers displayed artifacts and objects that they collected from other people and gave their order on it. In some ways, a seat at the table is a pushback against that people's stories and belongings, you know, in the way that Catherine Clement talked about, are shared with each other. And this museum becomes a space of sharing. And so if you ask me, how long did it take for this exhibit to be created? All my life, you know, right from the beginning of being walked by my grandfather down to Chinatown when I was a child, to meet his friends, a lot of these elderly men who were living, you know, the rest of their days alone and growing old together in cafes and spending days just, you know, teasing each other. And my grandfather took me down there, and it's those memories of those men who aren't around anymore. And yet their stories are the ones that never were captured, that were never showed up in museum spaces. And so whether it's the farmers or the cannery workers, or like my father, or my grandfather, a butcher on the Alaskan cruise ships, those are the kinds of stories that we want not just collected and shared in these kinds of, you know, sacred spaces of the museum, you could say, but with each other, with community members. And so we're really proud of that. And so you could say it's an ongoing process. So even when it moves, and even when this exhibit's over, we hope that the sharing continues.
Great, thanks, Henry. And so for our final question from the Q&A, I think this is a great one to wrap up with, from Elisa. Question for everybody who'd like to answer. The entire exhibit is wonderful, congrats. But what is your favorite part of it, or what would you say is a must-see for folks who haven't seen it yet?
Someone's got to answer, but
before someone else. There are too many. Some of them must see. I think Kito Joseph comes to mind, the Squamish Chinese artist who was commissioned for this project to produce a piece, and inspired by is shared ancestry, so Squamish Chinese, and came up with a beautiful illustrations. Too bad I can't move the camera and show it, but I think that's a piece that's worth the trip. I mean, so many stories here. I think it's actually the combination, the immersiveness. The short videos are amazing, and they rate really high in the evaluation that we have in the exit surveys. At the same time, I think what makes it that much special, because people can see videos at home on the screen, is that feeling of being here, surrounded by this kind of staging of stories, and that, and I think that in itself is kind of the feeling that you become an actor, you're part of that space, and you inhabit it, and you can share your stories as well with other visitors. So we've seen that between the facilitators who are helping people use the VR goggles, and people are always wanting to know about each other's stories. So that to me is what comes across as one of the most important aspect of the project is these encounters and these meetings, and I just want it to continue.
So my favorite, I'll just say, is if you do come down, and you may miss the goggles, the VR. It's some of our former students who took 360 VRs in villages in China. So you can stand in a rice field in a small village in China, the same villages where so many of the Cantonese migrants who came here, you know, the 99% of those who came here to Canada and the United States before the Second World War came from these 8 counties, these several hundred villages. And so you can stand in a rice field, and that would have been what it was like for if some of you were descended from those migrants for thousands of years. It would have been like a rice field. Your ancestors would have been in fields like that. And so you can get that as a 360 experience, you know, with looking around. You can go to where lions dance masks are made in a workshop, again, in Hoi Ping. You can go to an abandoned village, overgrown with, you know, banyan trees and what it looks like when a village like that goes back to the jungle that it, you know, it was carved out of. So yeah, do look for those. You may miss it, and hopefully there's a docent there who can help you put that on. And that would be my favorite thing not to miss. I don't know if Denise, if you've got one.
Yeah, I think I would encourage visitors to actually to both locations. There's some interactive spaces where you can leave your own messages and even respond to our hashtag to post on our crowdsourcing Instagram wall. What's really exciting about this exhibition is that there's different opportunities for visitors to contribute their own views and leave their voice. And I think that's the really exciting and living part of the exhibit. It's always changing. Every time I come here, there's different messages on the board. And then that goes the same as well for the CCM location in Chinatown. There's the migration map, your journeys map. So we encourage visitors as well to tell us what your journey to Canada was like, or what places you have been to. And I would also say hi to our goldfishes, live goldfishes display at the Museum of Vancouver. It's actually inspired by one of many Chinese Canadian cafes, but in particular the Lytton Hotel, as many of you may know of the recent fire that happened. But one of the inspirations for creating the exhibit space in the Museum of Vancouver location is to have a cafe, Chinese Canadian style cafe. And of course, many of us may be familiar when you go to one of those cafes, there's usually a goldfish tank. And so we really wanted to honor that and make that as part of the exhibition. So don't miss that, as it's a very important part of our kind of design concept from the very beginning.
This is Carol. One of the parts of the MOV exhibit that I thought was really powerful was the hall of pillars, which have on each of 4 sides of the pillars writings about the views of both the Chinese community and the white community vis-a-vis the Chinese. And it's it's appalling, it's disturbing. It has resonances not only for what people were saying in 1880 or 1923, but what some people are saying today. And I think it's a really powerful educational experience to walk through that hall. And we can't read all of the texts, but read some of them and have a sense of the unfortunate continuity, as well as the ways in which the world is a better place. But there's still a ways to go.
Great, thank you panelists for your responses. Hopefully that inspires some of you to come visit the site. And now for the final question of the night, we've invited CCM Chair Grace Wong to share with us what's next for the Chinese Canadian Museum.
Well, thank you.
後一個問題啦，我哋邀請咗華裔博物館嘅主席黃麗珠小姐到場嚟同我哋分享華裔博物館未來究竟有咩發展計劃。
Thank you to our MCs. Thank you to everyone for that wonderful sharing of your insights, your experience, and your many contributions. On behalf of the Chinese Canadian Museum, I'd like to extend our thanks to everyone involved in the preparation and launch of the catalog that we're celebrating this evening. I got a copy yesterday, and it's just beautiful. It's a wonderful commemoration of this award-winning exhibition. A Seat at the Table, Chinese Immigration and British Columbia was the inaugural exhibition of the newly formed Chinese Canadian Museum Society of BC. At the Vancouver Chinatown location in the historic Hon Sing building, we've welcomed nearly 6,000 visitors despite ongoing limitations resulting from the pandemic. It's tremendous to witness the learning and dialogue that this exhibition has provided a space for, particularly amongst intergenerational Chinese Canadian families who made the effort to experience the exhibition together. It has also been an important site for public education, especially during the surge of anti-Asian racism our communities have experienced this past year. With our mission of connecting to the Chinese Canadian story and addressing inclusion for all, A Seat at the Table provides an excellent taste of what the Chinese Canadian Museum strives to offer. Using food as an entry point, every visitor, regardless of their background, is invited to explore and reflect on the Chinese Canadian experience in the history of British Columbia and of Canada. Staying true to how Chinese Canadian stories are shared and passed down, the content of this exhibition is expressed in English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. A Seat at the Table will remain at both the Hon Sing and MOV locations into next year. We will be refreshing the exhibition at Hon Sing from time to time and hope more visitors and families will come again to the exhibitions. We will also continue developing programs that are meaningful to the community and continue collecting and sharing stories. We will also connect to other parts of the province and develop plans for parts of the A Seat at the Table to travel to other locations as space and resources allow. And we are working diligently to be able to open the Chinese Canadian Museum Provincial Hub in Chinatown so that we can more fully showcase the history, the stories, the living heritage, and the contributions of Chinese Canadians to this province and this country. Thank you to everyone for attending this launch. If you would be interested to have a copy of this beautiful catalog, it is now available for purchase at both exhibition locations. We invite you to pick up a copy at the temporary gallery in Chinatown or the Museum of Vancouver. If you live outside of the region, the Museum of Vancouver also offers shipping. As guests to the launch this evening, you have been sent a special discount code. A special thank you to the organizing committee for hosting this launch. Thank you also to our fantastic guest speakers and also the countless individuals who contributed their time, their stories, their expertise to the exhibition. It has been an honor for the Chinese Canadian Museum to be part of this strong collaboration with the Museum of Vancouver and with UBC Instruct. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace, for those inspiring words. We're all looking forward to what's next in store for the Chinese Canadian Museum. 多謝晒黃主席嘅分享，華裔博物館真係未來可期啊！ And that brings us to the end of our programming today. So thank you all for joining us today for the virtual launch of the A Seat at the Table Catalogue. 不知不覺已經到咗我哋今晚節目嘅尾聲啦。再次多謝大家今日參加我哋嘅一席之地 BC 省與華人的遷徙展覽目錄線上發佈會。
And once again, the catalogs are now available for purchase at the Museum of Vancouver location and the Chinese Canadian Museum. 展覽嘅目錄由今日開始就可以喺溫哥華博物館同埋喺華裔博物館嗰度去親自嘅購買。On behalf of the entire hosting team, thank you for joining us and we wish you a good evening. 我代表整個主辦嘅團體同仁今日去真係多謝大家嘅參與啦，嚟到我哋呢一個嘅展覽嘅書冊嘅發佈會，祝大家晚安。知道今天有一些說普通話的來賓，也想跟你們說一聲謝謝你們的參與，希望我們下次再見。